Sup? What's going on? What you up to? Not much. You? Just chilling, hanging out. Yeah, TBH. Like my status for truth is, you know how it is. But in this video today, we're going to discuss organelles of a cell. So organelles, we touched on them just ever so briefly, just skimmed over them in an earlier discussion. I don't even know what the hell video that was, but organelles pretty much the mini organs of that are within a cell, so they have specific function, specific structure, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. Now we're going to look at specific organelles within a cell. So we have the nucleolus, which produces rRNA, the major component of ribosomes. So pretty much think of the nucleolus as like the prerequisite class for ribosomes. So it produces the RNA, which is a major component of the ribosomes, which we'll learn what ribosomes do very, very shortly here, or their function. So chromosomes, also an organelle of the cell. It's chromosomes composed of DNA. Just think of them like little houses of DNA, and they just got a bunch of DNA stored up in there. Rough endoplasmic reticulum, it has ribosomal binding sites, and because of that, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, do play a role in the production and folding of proteins that are sent out of the cell. So proteins are produced, outside of the nucleus. We learned about that earlier, but the ribosomal binding sites on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, obviously ribosomes bind to them, and because of that, the ribosomes eventually produce and fold, and they eventually do form proteins that are secreted out of the cell. That's with the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Proteins can also be used within the cell, but with rough endoplasmic reticulum, they're always aid in the production and folding of proteins that are sent out of the cell. They're actually sent to the Golgi complex first, which we're going to discuss very, very shortly here. But rough endoplasmic reticulum has ribosomal binding sites and also does play a role in the production and folding of proteins that are sent out of the cell. It's like I guess an analogy is like rough ER is like the destination point for some ribosomes while on their protein producing journey. We'll put it that way. Then we have a smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So smooth endoplasmic reticulum, it aids in the production of lipids and also in detoxification. So it's like let's think of it like like the Mr. Clean guy who then eventually gives birth to a bunch of mini Mr. Clean lipid molecules there. So it obviously aids in that detoxification and the production of lipids. That's a pretty shitty analogy, but that's the best I got. It just aids in production of lipids. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum does also aids in detoxification. So two major key points. Mr. Clean, he's a detoxifier. He gives birth, produces a bunch of mini Mr. Clean lipid molecules there. So ribosomes, pretty important stuff here. Ribosomes are the site of protein synthesis. Pretty much like their life purpose is to build proteins. So when proteins are getting secreted out of the cell, they find a ribosomal binding site on the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Boom, ribosomes start to fold, proteins start to produce, then become more and more complex, get sent to the Golgi complex, which gets sent out of the cell eventually to do whatever function that specific protein is supposed to do. But ribosomes, yeah, their life purpose is to build proteins, and they are the site of protein synthesis. So the cytosol, we've mentioned this in a previous episode, but it's the medium through which materials are passed through the cell membrane. So there's the cell membrane. It's the fluid that pretty much holds all the organisms in place and how each organelle communicates with each other there. So think of water in the ocean. The entirety of the ocean is the inside of a cell membrane. Think of water in the ocean that submarines pass through and that fish swim in. So the submarines and fish are, let's say, the organelles. The cytosol, the ocean water, is the fluid that suspends the organelles. Golgi complex, we mentioned this a few seconds ago here, but it packages products within the cell for transport out of the cell. So it receives that protein or that immature protein from the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It matures the protein even more, pretty much prepares it ready to get transported out of the cell. So it's the packages products within the cell for transport out of the cell. Think of the Golgi complex as a bunch of elves in Santa's workshop the night before Christmas. So they're preparing, putting the finishing touches on the Santa's gifts. So we're in anatomical anatomy's case, putting the finishing touches on the protein, prepping them to be transported out of the cell. So lysosomes are another organelle within the cell, and what they do is they digest food materials that are brought into the cell via phagocytosis. So phagocytosis, if you recall, it's an engulfing of solid materials. Lysosomes, they digest these food. It's viruses, pathogens are food pretty much to lysosomes, so they digest this food, bring it in the cell to destroy it. They're kind of like the Pac-Man of the cell. A nice virus comes in, nice pathogens comes in, gets rid of it. So it creates an enzyme to get rid of it. Also, there's the nucleus. Pretty important stuff too within the cell. It's the control center. Control center of the cell, controls cellular activity through DNA action. So it's kind of like the headquarters of a Chick-fil-A that controls all the other restaurant locations. So it's one little central location, but it has so much control within the cell. It's the control center of the cell, it's called, because it does control cellular activity through DNA action there. So DNA goes to RNA, proteins produced outside of the cell. Proteins pretty much the cause every reaction in the body to take place. Mitochondria, another organelle within the cell. Here, it's the site of chemical reactions that extract energy from glucose. So think of mitochondria as the Hoover Dam that uses the energy from the Colorado River's water to power many houses. So it's that extraction site, glucose broken down, extracted, the energy is extracted from it. That all happens at the mitochondria. So in the Hoover Dam's place, it's just one specific area, but that Hoover Dam powers it powers so many houses or so many other functions within the cell, within the body, and all that takes place at the Hoover Dam or the mitochondria. Once again, the site of chemical reactions that extract energy from glucose. So without mitochondria, we're going to be lacking on ATP, and there's obviously more mitochondria in areas of the body that require more energy. So the muscles requires lots of ATP, lots of energy, so there's going to be lots of mitochondria in the muscle cells there. Also microtubules, microtubules are another organelle within the cell. They provide the supportive framework. Think of them as like pillars of a building. So it kind of just helps keep the shape. They just provide that supportive framework within the cell. That's all the further we'll go here. Microfilaments, another organelle. They're contractile filaments. They're like mini conveyor belts. So we'll talk about actin, myosin when we get to the muscular system. I know. Hold your cards, hold your panties. But sorry, got an email notification from Stitcher. Don't try to sell me anything. Come on. But microfilaments, contractile filaments, mini conveyor belts. They allow for little just contraction to move things throughout the cytosol, throughout the cytoplasm, if you will. Centrioles are another organelle. They're involved in animal cell division, so necessary for the reproduction of cells. So any cell that reproduces, there's going to be centrioles, which are involved in that animal cell division, that mitosis. Centrioles are a critical part of mitosis, or the production of new cells, or budding off of cells. But some cells that don't require animal cell, or some cells that don't divide, they aren't going to have centrioles. But in cells that do divide, that do undergo mitosis, there's definitely going to be centrioles in those specific cells. Flagella, not sure how it's pronounced, Flagella. You determine that. What flagella do, they move cells through liquid environments. So cells are obviously in a liquid environment throughout the body. They're kind of like little flippers. It's kind of like the tail for a cell, but little flippers that propel the cell through the pore, or in this case, the body. So little flippers on the cell propel it through the body there. And whenever a cell's in a liquid environment, that's what allows the cell to move through the liquid environment. Also, there's an organelle called the nuclear membrane. It permits large RNA molecules to pass through. So it's kind of like the booth at the turnpike that says, okay, this can pass through, this can't pass through. But in the actual scientific case, in the anatomy's case here with organelles, it allows large RNA molecules to pass through that membrane there, the nuclear membrane. So that's the membrane around the nucleus, obviously there. So if the RNA can move out of the nucleus to allow proteins to form, because the DNA is too big to leave the nucleus, the RNA goes through that nuclear membrane to where proteins are produced outside the nucleus. Then proteins are produced and either used in the cell or transported out of the cell. It's pretty cool how all this stuff works together. And then peroxisomes, they're abundant in cells that aid in detoxification. So obviously smooth endoplasmic reticulum aid in detoxification, but peroxisomes, they're extremely abundant in cells that aid in this detoxification. So think of them as like the cleanup crew that helps purify the body. So whenever there's a disease in your body, obviously the lysosomes are going to start eating the virus, eating the pathogens. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum play a little bit of a function in that detoxification, but especially the peroxisomes too. That is their main function, is abundant in cells that aid in detoxification. So if you're not feeling well or have a disease, peroxisomes are going to be functioning in full effect there. And proteasomes, look these up on your own time. It's another organelle, but we're going to touch on it here. Don't have an analogy, but they break down unneeded, unnecessary proteins in the body. So they help to break down excess or non-useful, non-functional proteins that are within the cell. And then microvilli are another organelle. They kind of invaginate into the cell to increase absorption, essentially. So they increase surface area they increase absorption without really increasing the surface area by too much, because they just invaginate into the cell. So here's a cell membrane, microvilli. They kind of go like that to allow the cell membrane to be more allow more absorption to take place. And then cilia, they're little kind of hairs on the cell membrane that help move particles out of the cell or out of the body that aren't needed there. So you get debris down your throat. The cilia will help to little hairs will help to push it back out with the aid of the mucus there. But that's really it. That's organelles. They all have certain functions. Vesicles are also technically an organelle, but we discussed those in a prior episode. They move substances out of the cell, move substances within the cell, or bring substances within the cell, and also move substances within the cell as well too. So those are all the organelles we'll discuss today here, and it's amazing. They're microscopic, and all these different functions, different organelles, different structures are working together to help me talk, help you listen, help us do everything. The body's a wonderful thing. It really is. And we're so grateful to have all these functions take place without actually even thinking about any of it.